Welcome to Transforming 45, the podcast that celebrates the incredible power of passionate voices. I'm your host, Lisa Boat. Join me in conversation with heart-led humans who share their deeply personal stories of transformation. Transforming 45 is here to uplift, connect, and remind you it's never too late to write your next chapter. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am really happy to have Lauren Fritsch with us. She is a connection that I just made a few weeks ago, but in our first conversation, we talked about essentially everything on the planet. So I have been really looking forward to this conversation. And Lauren is the creator of the Joy Money Matrix. Which is definitely something that I need to talk about. And I would imagine lots of the people who are listening are going to be interested in that as well. So welcome to the show today, Lauren.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. Tell me your story. How did you get to where you are at this particular point in your life?
So I'll start by going backwards, I guess. At this particular point in my life, I live in Buenos Aires with my husband and my daughter and two adopted pets who we picked up along the way since the pandemic. Normally, we are a family that lives in New York City, but we changed a lot of our lifestyle, like a lot of people did in the past 3 or 4 years. And we ended up here in Buenos Aires via the Dominican Republic, where we have real estate and investments, and occasionally a Joy Money Matrix retreat at our villa there. And prior to that, I have basically been self-employed as a consultant and a coach for the past 18 years, which is crazy for me to think about. I'm very bad at being an employee, and I'm really lucky that my entire career has largely been as my own boss. And the process of getting from there to here, I started out at my first self-employed thing because I was a director of a nonprofit as my first job out of college. But I always had this dream of living abroad. I was really interested in other cultures, and I loved fashion. I'd been making clothes since I was 5 years old. And I know it sounds crazy, but I had a family member teach me how to sew by hand. And so I started doing that. And then I started making clothes for myself. And then I started making clothes for other people. And I started selling them. And I thought, life is too short to not try to figure out your dreams. So in order to support myself while I was putting together my portfolio to go to fashion school, I got certified in yoga and Pilates. Well, didn't really get certified in yoga, but that is a very different story. And I started teaching yoga and Pilates. And so I started teaching. This was in the early 2000s, and I was putting together my fashion portfolio. And I went to fashion school in New York City, and then quickly realized that I was like, oh my gosh, this is not what I want to do with my life. I do not want to design woven shirts for Gap. Because when you get into the actual business of it, design, unless you're very successful, you are focused on one narrow thing. And I thought, okay, to heck with it. I got to get out of this country. I'm going to Italy. And I became the teacher and nanny and then cleaner somehow for a family. And they were very well connected within the fashion world. Their besties had the last name Ferragamo. And yeah, and so I knew that I had no real business experience except, and I know a lot of people who are attracted to personal development and coaching. There are some things that we all just have gifts in. And for whatever reason, I had a gift in business, and I can reverse engineer and think, how did I get there? But I started to have it explain people I explain to people that there are just certain things that are downloaded in my brain. I don't know how they got there. I just know. And so I bought samples of clothing from designers that I thought were interesting, and handbags and other things in Italy, because at the time Italy was I mean, it still is the luxury fashion capital of the world, but at the time that's where manufacturing was happening. And I bought the samples at my risk and flew back to the US. I bought a car. I don't even know how. This is like the days of free and easy credit, right? Like, I didn't have a job, and they're like, "Sure, have a car loan." And I packed up samples, and I literally cold called every boutique on the East Coast. And I got my foot in the door to show them completely unknown brands, and then I got them to write orders. So in that period of time, I got a crash course in sales. And I also realized that the fashion industry was really backwards when it came to the emerging technology, AKA the internet, and that fashion companies were really dysfunctional. And so very quickly, I became not the salesperson, because sales is easy in fashion. Like, you can sell things. And I got to go to I had a lot of interesting experiences with great brands, but I knew that that was not my future. The sales world of fashion, I could tell some crazy stories about that, but you can make a lot of money and you don't have to be very smart. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
And make that of that what you will. And I knew that I didn't want to spend my life in that environment, even though it could be very lucrative. And so as a consultant, I got to work with lots of different brands. I wasn't, my eggs weren't all in one basket. I got to have really interesting projects. Sometimes I was helping them with merchandising or design or organizational development. And fashion is a really like starry kind of industry, but it's also very, as I said, dysfunctional. And so I started to work and branch out with other brands. And in 2006, I started my coach certification. And I had hired a coach to help me in my personal life and professional life. She said, "You know what? I think you'd make a really good coach." So I added that to my toolkit. And since then I've done, we're all probably the same. We're constant learners, right? We're absorbing all the time. And so I've certainly continued to add to the toolkit. And of course, too, we have the lived experience of navigating our own lives and our relationships and our businesses. And that's, their growth opportunities all around. But in I don't know, I guess so I've always been a coach. That's what I've been doing. And the funny thing is that I started coaching athletes and performance many years prior, when I was 14. And I've coached either in sports or in life. I've coached Olympians, and I've coached politicians, and I've coached billionaires, and I've coached CEOs, and I've coached a really large variety of people. And I feel really blessed to have had that experience. And it certainly has informed the work that I do. And over time, I've been steeped in this whole online markety world. And as you get older, and I think the clarity of the pandemic too, it makes you say, what do you really want to be doing? Like, why are we here? And it took me, just if anybody out there is trying to start a business, or you have been doing work and you're like, I need my personal brand. And even if you're an employee, people are telling you to do this thing. I will tell you that it took me 17 and a half years to understand what the through line was in my work. So if anyone's feeling frustrated, there is very little chance it's going to take you as long as it did me. So stay encouraged. And and I've done like all kinds of countless things to try to discover that stuff. And I finally realized that what I really care about in my work, and whether it's a program or a workshop or a one-on-one client relationship, I care about growth. That's a huge value. But what I really want to know, and what I really want to help people do, is answer the question of like, how do you really want to live? What do you really want to spend your time doing? And it's such a simple question. I think it's a lot harder than people realize to answer. because we're so conditioned by what we should do or by what we think we should do or what we think we should want to do and what we have to do. And so unwinding all of the layers of stuff that distort the essence of what how do we really want to live? How do we want to spend each moment of this life? That has only recently, very, very recently, become clear to me is the crux, the thrust of my work. And it's really nice to have that as the through line. And as I've gone through, I've created a lot of interesting intellectual property and programming that I license out or that I run for my own clients. And that is really gratifying. And I'm still trying to answer that question. We right now in Buenos Aires are in a time of odd transition. And so we're very much engaged with that. And it's still hard. 20 years in, it's still hard to live true to what it is that I actually want to be doing with my life. I still struggle with all the things that come in to distract me, innocently from the core of what I deem as important. And so that is, I think, that's how I got here. There are, of
And
course, other
what a
ways.
ride. What a ride to get to where you are now, right? You have engaged in so many different areas and I could pull out probably 1,000 different stories from each element or each section or chapter of your life. And so when you say it took me 17 and a half years to really understand the through line of my business, I can see that. But at the same time, it's evident in a way where you were constantly making the choice of how you wanted to live your life.
Yeah, I didn't always understand that that's what I was doing. But I
Hmm.
was, and I'll give you one very clear example of that. So I went to a university that if you had certain grades and certain achievements at that university, you were expected to go interview with BlackRock and Bain Consulting and um, you know investment banks, and that's what you did. And instead, I ignored all of those recruiters, and they pursued you, right? Because they could get a list. And which was crazy to me because I also grew up without a lot of monetary resources. So I was like, no, I don't want to make a lot of money. I'm going to go get this really low paying nonprofit job. But it came with a lot of great perks, and it came with a mega title. And I didn't have to really report to anybody. It was very low key. And I didn't know it at the time because people were going, "What is wrong with you?" And I couldn't articulate it. But as I got a bit older, I realized like something in me knew that the 60-hour to 80-hour a week investment banking job was not for me. Something in me knew,
Mhm.
I could not have said this at that time, that flying out every Monday morning and flying back every Thursday night in the consulting gigs was not going to cut it. And so some part of me had a protective, made a little protective choice to say, no, I'm going to go this way, even though this is the dominant play. And we don't
Mhm.
always know the reasons in the moment, but I think but I do think I've been slowly doing that, very slowly doing that my whole life, like inching closer.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Like going back to the beginning of your story when you said it probably sounds crazy that I was making clothes when I was 5 years old. It doesn't to me because the reason that I had Barbies was that I designed clothes on them.
Cool.
And that Yeah, that is the whole reason. And my mom sewed, so she showed me a few things, but mostly I just had this bag of scrap fabric where I would go through and I'd do color combinations and pattern matching, and little stitches, but mostly I was just tying fabric around Barbies in ways
Mhm.
that seemed interesting to me to create outfits and things. And yet, because we are not really given the space to lean into what really lights us up and what is creative. When I said I wanted to be a designer, there was nobody in my life who said, "Oh yeah, that's a great design. That's a great choice. You do that. Go for it." It was always like, "Yes, Lisa, you're really creative, but wouldn't you rather do this?"
Mm,
And or wouldn't this be, more in line for you in terms of having a family?
mm.
And I actually grew up never wanting to be a teacher. And I would actually actively tell people that because my dad was a teacher and I saw the way that and ended up as a principal. I saw the way that it took over his world and his life. And I did not want that for myself. And it's exactly what I ended up choosing. And when you said, I realized I was a bad employee, there was also something that went off in my mind. And I'm interested. So you were referring to it a little bit as there was something in you, but what was it? What do you think made you a bad employee?
And I say this, I have very little employment history, um, because of the nature of my career trajectory. So I'll say this from having been on, like, lifted up underneath the hood of a lot of businesses that you guys have heard of. Okay.
Mhm.
I've been in the trenches and I've talked to the CEOs and I've talked to the people who are employees. I'm a bad employee because of several things. One is I believe in efficiency and I am really fast. And the whole concept of employment, of you have this set period of time that you offer to the employer, just doesn't make sense to me because I can get something done in like 30 minutes. I actually did this in my first job. I'd be done with my
Mhm.
work and I would like I was the director of the Virginia Club, which is in the Yale Clubhouse, which is a hotel and social club and whatnot. And I would like go hang out with the various other people and be like, hey, what do you need help with? Because there was nothing for me to do. I was like, done. And it was so bizarre that I had to stay in this building arbitrarily because because and so
Yes.
there's that piece, right? That's number one. The second one is I and I think a lot of fire signs, whether you like chill with astrology or not,
Mhm. Oh, I'm in.
I, okay, a lot of fire
Yeah.
signs really hate emotional dishonesty. And the entire corporate culture of the Western world functions on emotional dishonesty. So for me, it would be like a constantly enervating and triggering experience, I think, to be in corporate America all the time. It's different when I'm a
Mhm.
consultant because I can come in, I'm untouchable, you know? And if I do something wrong and they don't like it,
Yeah.
don't pay me. I'm out. Like, I'm not beholden to you. I can say the hard things. And that was one of the reasons that I liked that role so much. And I'll continue to do consulting, I think, and for many, many years. Um, but the emotional dishonesty piece is really tough for me. Um,
Mhm.
Finally, the other piece is that I really like being at home. So I just saw a mom's like reel on Instagram about I I homeschool, not maybe because I like to drink my coffee in the morning and not go do pickup and like parade around with the moms, but maybe that's not it either. So I totally
Yeah.
agree with that. I just like being at home. So for
Mhm.
all those reasons.
As- Yeah. So I asked that question because I had a theory, and you absolutely gave me the evidence for my theory. But what's really interesting to me from my personal perspective is what took me 20 years to understand is that I'm also a bad employee for the same reasons. And it being a bad employee doesn't mean that you're not good at your job. It actually means that you're remarkably good at your job.
Yes.
And and because you are so good at it, all the things that actually get in the way of allowing you to be excellent and really good at your job are unbearably infuriating.
Yeah,
And
that's
that was that was my story as well, but I spent 20 years throwing myself against the wall trying to change a system that was never ever going to change,
no,
right?
no.
And the intersections, the more conversations I have, the more I realize just how intersected everything is, right? Like the education system is the foundation for the business world. So of course they operate on the same premises, right?
Mhm.
So emotional dishonesty was also exactly what I was really struggling with almost more than anything at the end of my career, that we couldn't speak honestly about anything or give people space to talk about what was really happening. At the end of my career, we were a system where every single person in it was operating from a trauma response, and no one would allow space for that. And so what we're seeing unwind in the system now is exactly that. It is the oppression of anyone being able to express their trauma experiences.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
a beautiful assessment of what has been your personal experience, and I suspect most people who've had jobs of any sort would recognize their workplaces in what you just said, which
Mhm.
is really, really, really a shame.
Yes, it is. Right? Because in that is great opportunity for healing and change and
Mhm.
evolving. But
Yeah.
because as humans, we're so wired to want everything to stay the same, that is what becomes the priority more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think there's another piece of that. I mean, you're already plugged into this viewpoint, so I don't think this is going to shock you. But I think too, because our corporations, organizations, we are in a distinctly Western patriarchal culture, right? And I know people will sometimes shut down the second they hear patriarchy. Sorry, please keep listening. Um, what does that really mean? That means that there is a distinct hierarchy where hegemony and power are reinforced by the structure and
Mhm.
the behaviors and the mores of the people in power, the people who have the power, the people who have the influence. And so when, Lisa, you're saying, everybody has a trauma response, there's no room for people to share their experience in trauma response. Why is that? Because that is breaking down the hierarchical structure into something that is more equitable, right? Because we're saying I
Yes.
had this and I had this, and the patriarchal structure of corporate America or the Western world, and that goes for education systems too. Okay.
And pretty much and the healthcare system
And
and
the
every
healthcare,
other institutionalized system we have.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The people in power, they don't have a vision for a place where people can share equally. All they have is a vision for blame and punishment,
Yeah.
retribution, right? That reinforces the existing power structure because they don't want to change it. So, like I said, this isn't a surprise, right? But when you think about it from that perspective, you go, "Oh, well, no wonder the employee feedback box is such a joke," right?
Yeah.
Or whatever is your organization's like attempt to mollify the people who are actually doing the work, and not receiving the benefit of that work, right? What we're talking about is literally, the problem with every structure that we've had is since we dismantled indigenous matriarchal culture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly. Because, because it moved from collaboration right? Where collaboration was the center of how communities work together and everybody brought their gifts and one
Mhm.
gift wasn't more important than the other. They were all equally necessary for a community to survive. And so
Right.
collaboration was the key and was the power to which is power to or power with power structures, right? Rather than the power over, which is what was evolved to, so that now everything is power over. And I was not at all interested in the power over structure,
Mm.
which is what made me a really bad employee because I was constantly looking to shift the power source from here to down here into collaboration.
Yeah. And when you're in that system, whether, whether there's an out from it or not, when you're in that system and you can see it and you're still trying to like maintain yourself within it, it's really painful and it's really depleting,
Yes,
inevitably. So,
absolutely. Yeah, because you're abandoning yourself constantly.
yeah.
And one of the things I'm really interested in your opinion, because when you went back and said, I know some people shut down when they hear the word patriarchy, and I use patriarchy on the show all the time, but you're right, people do shut down. But I think one of the places that we haven't peeled back the layers on is that patriarchy has like it's screwed us all, not just women, but it has also put men in very difficult positions, whether they realize it or not, right? And
Yeah.
there are everyone is different and will have different experiences, but one of the lines that I love from the Barbie movie, I know it has its problems, but there are some great lines. And there's this line where Ken says, when I realized the patriarchy wasn't just about horses, I wasn't really interested anymore. And it's
I remember that one.
I I died on that line because I wonder sometimes how many people and anyone from the gender spectrum, right? Like if we're actually looking at this from a non-binary perspective, because all different elements of how we show up in this world, because I could say men, but I could also say women who are experienced internalized sexism show up in the same way, where you find yourself caught in the power structure, which is eliminating your humanity and not allowing you to show up and do what you wanted to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. That is happening. I mean, I think, golly, I've got a lot of things that are flooding into my brain around this topic. I'm going to speak to this from the perspective of someone. I have three brothers, and one of
Mhm.
them, shit. I so we have the same last name, just FYI, and he has
Okay.
like a powerful army of trolls. And he is a political consultant for the right wing, and typically
Right.
alt-right white supremacists. And he believes that no women or feminized men should be in public positions. No teachers, no doctors, certainly no politicians. That all of those women and feminized men belong in the home. So the reason I bring that up is because that
Mhm.
is the essence of the distortion that
Yes.
happens within the male psyche because of the patriarchy. And that is extreme, y'all.
Yes.
It is an extreme distortion, but it's real and it's driving a lot of behaviors that we see. And this goes beyond political affiliation, it goes beyond religious affiliation. There are men
Absolutely.
who have absorbed such traumatic perspectives about who they have to be that
Yes.
their only option in the identities that are on offer in the buffet of our Western world for them, the only identities available to them are uh, those identities steeped in rape culture in I have to be better than you, I have to dominate you. Um, and I'm not talking about just sexuality. I'm talking about like every little thing. Like, have you ever been in a line and had the man cut in front of you? That happens all the time in a country called the
Mhm.
Dominican Republic. I have literally been standing in line and the men just does not matter. That is a country that as recently as 1996 did not make it illegal to kill a woman.
Mhm.
So, I mean, this is what we're talking about. It's real. It's real that
Yes.
that we cut off our humanity. We dehumanize the other when we're caught in this patriarchal system. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, you just like crystallized a couple of things for me. So one of them being, when we dehumanize someone else, we dehumanize ourselves because it's impossible to not do that.
Yes.
And so when we are coming from a dehumanized place of ourselves and coming from that place of deep fear, when when we're in that place of deep fear and our brains and our nervous systems are lit up and our prefrontal cortex is offline, you realize why. Because people ask the question, well, why can't people change? Why can't people think differently? Because it is so energy expensive to be
Mhm,
living in this place of intense fear, because
mhm.
that's what that is. It shows itself to the world as power, but behind that need for power and domination is just fear and a
Yes.
brain that is completely offline. So it's not even possible to make rational decisions
Mm-mm.
or to consider learning or thinking from a different perspective. And I hadn't really put that together until you were talking about that perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, and I mean the conversation about that you just brought up of how do we invite people to consider the possibility that things could be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is it's such a complex conversation, and I've done a lot of thinking around it, and psychologically, I have a whole theory around how specifically the US got to where we are and why we have the polarity that exists. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a really
Yeah.
complex conversation and this is not for today. But
We're going to have that conversation at some point, though, because I'm
um
fascinated to hear your thoughts.
yeah, if you want to hear it, I've been working on on an essay, and I will
Oh, yeah.
say that fear has actually kept me from continuing to work on it and continuing to pursue it because I'm still like publicly easy to connect to my brother and his work. And I have
Right.
some fear around that. That said, so perfect example, I
Mm-hmm.
feel not safe in my body, and that's preventing me from being able to move forward towards something that I desire, which is expressing these theories on a more in a more public way. So you can imagine
Yeah.
when someone is feeling fear that some aspect of their livelihood or their worldview is shifting, that creates fear within the nervous system, as you know, as Lisa you said beautifully, and there's no opportunity to then bring in nuance or consider alternate viewpoints. You know, my therapist said something really interesting this week because I've really been struggling with, and we discussed this right before the call, uh,
Mm-hmm.
PMDD, post. I don't even know what it's called. PMS, PMDD, premenstrual dysphoria disorder, and it's a really kind of intense form of PMS if you've not heard of it. And so I've had a lot of, and also just adrenal fatigue because my daughter has had an autoimmune disease for about 7 years, and it's exhausting. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've been talking about how I can support myself to make small changes in my life that will help me feel better. And she said something this week that was so great. She said, you know, just the impulse is enough. And I was like, what? And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as coaches, right, we're always, I feel like we're looking for bigger sometimes.
Mm-hmm. For
And
action. Yeah.
yeah,
Generally.
action always. Let's move people into action. And of course, we know with work in neuroscience and HPA axis, that's hypothalamus pituitary axis,
Yeah.
so if we're working within there, we know the concept of titration, right, from chemistry, which is just like little drops can help us make small changes and progress. But in practice, the dominant culture doesn't like small steps. And coaching often teaches us to like get into action, get your clients into action. And so when my therapist offered up this idea that just the impulse is enough, and she says it so gently too, like she's like very slow and soft and measured.
Mhm.
I was like, oh, just the impulse to want to do my cash flow projections is enough. And I told
Yeah.
that to my husband. And he's like, can you do them tomorrow? I was like, I might have the impulse to do them
Yes.
tomorrow. But so then taking it back to yes, we are living in a time when we sometimes feel trapped in systems that are overwhelming, that seem impervious to change, right? And yet
Mhm. Yeah.
we still have to find our way within them. And certainly your work for women in perimenopause and menopause, why are all of us so freaking tired? It's because we've been in these systems for so long that don't support us and in
Yes.
fact require us to overexert all the time. And I think that lovely Justine's perhaps the impulse is enough for now.
Yes.
Um,
That is a really powerful statement when you let yourself sit with it, because when you know how brains rewire themselves, it is through thought, right? Thoughts are actual things. They are chemical structures that happen.
mhm,
And so allowing yourself to sit with the impulse of it as it is building a new neural pathway is such a gentle and self-affirming way to let yourself ease into change
mhm,
instead of slamming yourself into change, which is or ignoring ourselves entirely as we push ourselves beyond what's actually humanly possible in this ever evolving need for change.
for change, right? It's
Yeah.
really subtle. It's really gentle. I use the word gentle a lot in my programming. And in fact, I created something as a direct, I don't want to say like taking a shot at, but there's something called 75 hard. And someone told me about it who I'm close
I don't
to.
know what that is.
Oh my gosh, it's like a whole book and a movement. So basically it's like, I don't know if it's 75 days, it must be, but you have to do 2 workouts a day. One of them must be outside. They must be 45 minutes each. You must drink X amount of water. You must eat this. You must read this. You must meditate that. And I was like, whoa. And
Whoa,
so
is the
yeah, and look,
yeah.
I was a college athlete, a Division I NCAA ACC champion athlete, okay? Like I remember doing 2 workouts a day. I remember doing 3
Mhm.
workouts a day. I remember doing 3-hour workouts. Like there's a time and a place like to get your endurance on. But I was thinking about the people who are attracted to this and they're like moms and people with mental health stuff and people with jobs. And I was like, okay, cool. I can see why people are attracted to this like thing. And so as an antidote, I created something called Gentle 30, which was an
Yes.
invitation to do 10 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of movement, and 10 minutes of gentle movement at that, and 10 minutes of creativity a day. And in the time that we've done it, with hundreds of women have done it, it's usually free. Um, the question is, well, what if I don't do all 3 every day? And I'm like, cool. Did you think about it?
Yeah.
And if they thought about it, that's good. And it's been really interesting. The because we all have dreams of positive, sweeping change, but coming back to the question of how do we actually want to live our lives, like
Yes.
what is the sustainable, what's a sustainable, as you said, what brings more ease, right? And I don't think it's the stuff that is shocking to the system, like just it's the stuff that is small, that over time can build the neuronal connections that you're talking about.
Yeah,
It starts with the
absolutely.
impulse.
I've been Yeah, like I've been in the business of internal motivation since my degree is in therapeutic recreation, which sounds a little airy fairy on the outside. So I've always had this like love hate relationship with my degree, but it's becoming more and more meaningful the older I get and the more I lean into this work, because it's where I started learning about flow theory and internal motivation versus external motivation and self-efficacy over, um, you know, self leadership. And so that method that you are talking about, the gentle 30, is a sustainable way to create motivation that is internal.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we go into things that are extreme, it's often in service of discipline, which is an external motivator.
Yeah, it's an external
And the
structure.
only change that Absolutely. The only change that actually stays, it is what is it comes from the inside.
Right. It's an inside job.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me, like, we'll have to pick up this conversation too. I don't think we talked about this. So the book I'm working on is called Ritual and Reward. And it's about how people I call rebel mystics can get more done, can stop procrastinating, and also bring reverence to their daily round. And I call it atomic habits for crystal people, like in shorthand.
I love
Even though
that.
I've never read Atomic Habits, and I won't, because I
Same.
don't like to, muddy the waters, basically. But I told my tech bro, my brother, who's a tech guy, I told him Atomic Habits for Crystal People. Who's like, yes, that's so dope. And I was like, hey, I'm communicating it well. But all that to say is, like, I have a very unusual approach to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and it would be really interesting, as I get closer to being done with the manuscript, like, let's chat about it, because and maybe I can bring you into some passages in the book, because it's
Love that.
yeah, you know we all have things that we need to do, and we all have things that we want to do. And I think most people, and anyone with a trauma history, tends to not do those things. And
Yes.
that can be it's its own kind of trauma. And that delay, or that holding apart from ourselves something that we really actually desire. And so that's the crux of that book, and I'm really excited about it. It should come out next year. I had a really lovely publisher ask me for it, so that was exciting. And I'm sure I'm going to have to, I don't know, do book talk or something to get more into it. But it's something I feel really passionate about. So obviously you have a lot of background in it. It will be fun to chat about.
Yeah, I do. And I'm also very passionate about it. And I think it is a conversation that is yet another one of the many conversations we've been having that is missing in the general, population, is understanding what actually changes when you allow yourself to come back into your body, to love yourself enough to live in your body so that you can listen internally and you can know. As I was going through your website and your social media, the theme of "you are enough." And I know that that is a line that gets thrown around a lot, but that is the heart of internal motivation, is knowing that I am enough, and that coming from what I know to be true for myself is the only place I can actually live from in a way that will be truly meaningful and sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if we all
Mm-hmm.
can connect with the enoughness that is inherent, I mean, I say this, it's kind of flippant, but it's not. If we cultivated
Mm-hmm.
enoughness, like, across the board, I don't think we would have conflict. We would have world
I agree.
peace.
Yes.
And I say that I used to be real flip about it. And my husband is by training, he's a historian. He loves specifically World War II. And my granddad was in World War II. So I've been reading books lately, and I didn't know that much, like I had a great education, but we kind of like pooped out in AP US history around around World War II
Hmm.
before the end of the school year, right? And
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, I actually don't know all the detail. And, we have lots of Hollywood movies to look to, but like, let's get into this. And so it's been really interesting. And also as someone, I've been the coach for some men who have really prominent roles in government or really prominent roles in business. And those have been the people who like facilitate war, right? And so it's been
Hmm.
really interesting to have now my professional background of 20 years in as as I'm reading these books now with a new perspective, not a high schooler, right? And
Yes.
the which again goes back to patriarchy and systems. Um,
And
seeing
oppression. Yes.
how these monsters emerged as a product of various systems that had to work together to allow these destructive changes to take place. And we're seeing that now. So just for reference,
Hmm.
it was, what, October 19th, 2023.
Yes.
And so we've got the Palestine-Israel conflict is raging in real
Hmm.
life, and then also along social media communication lines. And for a lot of
Yes.
people, it's been really traumatizing. Like I'm kind of, it's a lot. It's a lot, especially if
Yes.
people are empathic. And that's on
Hmm.
top of like the cascade of things that have gone on since, let's say, 2016. Um, so
Yeah.
so it's been so fascinating for me now, having the knowledge I have about psychology and about leaders and about trauma, about organizational development and change, to read these books and realize that, what we're all fundamentally up against is how can we um how can we as a collective, and then in, and the macro and then micro, how can we be better humans? And I don't think that everybody's asking that question, but I think enough people are asking
Hmm.
that question that it's starting to have a ripple effect that will be quite tangible. And we still have a long way to go, and there are always going to be like these, I don't want to call it tests, but I think there we have so much more facility to um, to show up in our enoughness, and either dismantle or reform the systems that have been dominating and creating the polarities and the conflicts that we've seen for millennia. It's been
Yeah,
millennia.
absolutely. And it is that because when you know that you are enough, you stand firmly in what you know to be true about yourself and who you actually are, and not the roles that define you or the external things that you think give you value.
Hmm.
Because in order to create any kind of reparation, we have to, as humans, be able to say, I did shitty things. You did shitty things. We have all done really shitty things. And if you are someone who gets value from the external, of someone else always telling you that you are great, then the thought of saying, nope, I've done some real shitty things, completely unravels everything that you
Hmm.
know to be true about yourself.
Yes.
And that, yeah, and that is where we are finding this tension, why leaders are unable to come to the table and say, we made really terrible mistakes.
Hmm.
We have all made really terrible mistakes. So we can say that we did, and now we can make a different decision.
Yeah, I love that. I love what
And
you just
that's,
pointed out. The identity is so interwoven with the system that if you
Yes.
start to undo the identity, the system cannot stay, right? And that is really,
Exactly.
so going back to the fear conversation, that is really fear inducing for so many people. And that is whether you're talking about your local PTA and the
Yes.
leadership there and whatever is going on, or the swim
Yep.
club, or fucking Palestine and Israel conflict, right? Like
Yes.
they're literally just like abstractions of the same thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And my brother too, right? It's the same exact thing. So I love this. Ooh, what fun. I mean, like this is a great conversation.
Yeah.
That's what I mean is fun.
I mean, if yes. No, it
Nice.
is it's it's powerful when you can have exchange of ideas with people, right? Which is what I feel is missing, is that we are willing to actually have exchange of ideas. And at the same time, like you said, for anyone who is empathic, and actually anyone on the planet, because at our most quantum level, we are all just foam on this planet and completely connected with each other, right? There is no separation from anyone or anything. And so the pain and suffering and grief that anyone experiences on this planet, we do as well. It's impossible
Mhm.
to not get splashed by that.
Yeah.
And so it is that duality of holding both things, of we can absolutely have intellectual conversation where we exchange ideas about it, and we can also hold our emotion about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I have a really bizarre religious amalgamation of ideas, but it's one of the reasons I'm always
Mm-hmm.
going back to mystics, right?
Yes.
Because above all or below all, I don't know which way you would say it, is the fundamental knowing that everything is connected. And I think that the disconnect that people feel on so many levels for so many reasons, if we can continue to foster ways for people to feel that universal oneness,
Yes.
regardless of doctrine or ideology or identity, if we can foster more opportunities for people to experience the universal oneness, then we also get closer to experiencing what I call heaven on earth. But if you want to get out
Mm-hmm.
beyond, you know, terms that have a religious connotation, I don't like the word enlightenment either, but just like a you
Mm-hmm.
know, maybe bliss. Like there's something there for us.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so we humans.
That's beautiful. We humans. And here we are, and yet you have taken all of your experiences to create a reality that is empowering and making space for people to be able to show up in ways that allow them to start this transformative process.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I am doing that.
you
I'd like
are.
to be doing more of it, but we will be doing more of it in 2024. I'm like
Yeah.
heavily focused right now on our little family and
Mm-hmm.
making space
Yeah.
for the impulses of healing in our little family. So, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah. And that's really important. And thank you for being so honest and transparent about that, because of the narrative that we're fed that we can do all things at all times. And the truth is, we can't.
Mm-mm.
We and there are times where our loving energy needs to flow into the humans that are around us. And that is exactly what it needs to be in those times. So
Yeah, that's been really hard
yeah.
for me. I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I mean, and again, I like to be honest. So we, in our family, and we're good for time. Are we good for time?
Yeah. Yes, we're
Okay.
good for time.
So just for also anybody who's in the world of business and or has gone through fluctuations of cash flow, our little family, my husband lost his job in 2019.
Mm.
And 2019 was a year that was really tragic for us. not just because of his job loss, but because of my daughter's illness. And
Mhm.
she has something called pandas. And so if you ever come across a child acting psycho, um, see if 10 days of amoxicillin changes them. And if it does, then they have something that you need to go to an expert for, because it's scary. And if you can nip it in the bud really fast, you'll have way better outcomes. And if you don't,
Mhm.
like us, you'll spend a very long time trying to deal with a chronic illness. Regardless,
Mhm.
we were in a lot of suffering. And so I didn't have the capacity at that time to lift up my husband with my work. I was still Joy Money Matrix was at its early stages, but I was really struggling still with postpartum depression, and then having this sick daughter, and still not having a diagnosis. And so in the 4 years since, it's been really hard not to feel like I've focused on my work, quote unquote. And at the same time, I discounted all of the amazing things that happened organically with my work over the course of 4 years. And I had someone point it out to me just very recently, and she said, "But look at all you've done while you've been actively suffering and not really actively working." And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I was able to do while I was taking time off from my work, we didn't have really good internet during the pandemic. We were in the Caribbean, and I was livid. I was like, oh. But you can't host workshops for 200 people if the internet might go out at any time, because then you have to just refund everybody, and that is not
Yeah.
fun. So, um, so I was like, wow, the universe, the goddesses are like, you don't get to do what you're used to doing to make money. And so it was a really interesting time where I got to learn some other skills around real estate and investing and interior design and contracting. And I discovered I was really good at it, but that my brain and my emotions really missed my work. And so it was really interesting too, because I hadn't really experienced having things that I put out into the world like fail or not be profitable. And so that was an experience now that when I go back full throated into Joy Money Matrix and promoting the book and for Ritual and Reward, things like that, I will have a different experience to offer the people that are coming through. And I'm no longer like a quote unquote business coach, but certainly when you have an offer that says joy and money, like money keeps us sustained, right?
Yes.
We're not yet in a post currency world, okay? Um,
Yes.
even though my daughter is like, what is wrong with us? Why don't we just like get beyond money? I'm like, you're so right, but we're not there
Yes.
yet. And so for anybody who, if you're having doubts about the work you do, or you're like, why can't I make money at this? Or like, can I even do this? Am I good enough to do this? Know that the ebbs and flows of our attention on work or money and family and health and art, like our attention is always going to ebb and flow throughout these things. And money's the same. Money ebbs and flows. It's cyclical. And and that there's no meaning to that about who we are as people, right? And so that was such a long digression, but that was really helpful for me to experience at a time where we really needed it, and I couldn't make it happen because I didn't have the capacity, and all the judgments I had about myself because I couldn't do that. And we're in that right now. Like, I don't have the capacity to do the things that I would like to do. um, so I'm just saying, okay, I
Yeah.
don't have that right now.
Yep.
And it's a lot easier. So those cycles, I think they come for so many different reasons, but they're obviously not always comfortable. In fact, most likely they are not.
Mhm.
Unless you're like freaking Buddha. But
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not.
No, I'm not either. I have moments of calm around it, but my humanness always shows itself. But I, again, through this part of your story, it takes you back to enoughness and knowing that You are, it will be okay. You are enough. And I can't get enough of you, actually. You're on when you're doing your book tour, you need to come back and we need to have another conversation because I think that we could talk forever.
We could do
And
an
for today,
entire series, you know. Like,
yes,
that's
yes,
us.
we could.
We could drop like a little micro series. There's a lot for us to cover because I did most of the talking this time, and there's a lot.
There's a lot. Okay, we're going to talk about some things when we go off the air.
Yay.
Thank you so much. This
Thank
has
you.
been a really valuable hour. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this transformative journey. Your support means the world. If you resonated with our conversation and want to uplift the Transforming 45 community, here's what you can do. Connect with me about how you can reclaim your own magic. Check the show notes for all the ways you can find me. Subscribe and share. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you found value here, share it with friends, family, and anyone seeking inspiration. Leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your words can make a significant impact and help others find their way to these transformative stories. Join the conversation on social media platforms. Follow us on Instagram @LBoat. You can also find me on Facebook and TikTok. And if you know someone whose story could inspire others, reach out and let me know. I love connecting with diverse voices that carry the power to transform lives. Remember, your support fuels my mission to share authentic stories of transformation. Thank you for being part of the Transforming 45 family. Until next time, keep shining your light and embracing your journey.
Intricast.